Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here, your host of UnWoke.Academy. Welcome to another Wednesday live stream. Don't forget to share this out with your contacts and your social media sphere of influence every Wednesday. I want to go live and bring up topics and conversation that I think should be important to all of us. Today, we're going to delve a little bit into the weeds with capital markets. What are capital markets? How are they supposed to work? What's broken? And I want to get some information out about what I predict is being set up for Trump, Make America Great Again with the MAGA movement and America First. So, forgive me, we need to do this. We're going to have to get into the weeds a little bit and talk at a high level about what capital markets even means. It's actually, when you step back and take a look at the way that we fund business enterprise, and that means if you or somebody you know has some idea that they want to start a business, how do they go about doing it? Well, there are a couple of readily available ways that people start some new business venture. And lots of things, actually pretty much all of them, started as a concept for somebody. And you hear all the stories throughout American history of somebody having a concept and it starts in their garage. Like we've all grown up on the stories of Hewlett Packard and Robert Dell and even Alexander Graham Bell and all sorts of people who thought, what if? What if I took this concept and turned it into a business and maybe we could make some money at it? Well, people in current era who have concepts like that, they typically, assuming they're not already loaded with money, and those are seldom the people that go out and jump into new business venture, create some new enterprise. But what people will typically do is go out to their network of people that they know, including friends and family, and borrow money. Every once in a while, you get people that like max out their credit cards. They believe so much in some new business venture that they'll max out everything that they have access to. And that's fairly common. Banks used to be a fairly reliable resource to go to borrow money if you had a good pitch. And it looked something like this. You would go into the local community bank and say, I've got this idea, and I think we can make these beautiful widgets and people will buy them. And the bank may or may not lend you money. Well, they've had a massive closings of small regional community-based banks across the United States for decades now. It was a figure something like over 800 in the US closed during the Obama administration. And it's gotten worse, I think, since. So community banks aren't really a resource so much anymore for somebody that has a business concept to borrow money. Well, that's where capital markets sometimes can come in. We're actually getting a little bit ahead of myself. Typically, if you have a business concept and bootstrap it by some way, shape, or form, borrowing money from friends, or you get a rich benefactor who likes your idea and they buy in, and that, by the way, is kind of part of the concept behind that TV show Shark Tank, which I actually happen to really enjoy. These are people that get kind of partway down the path, but then feel they can't continue to grow without more money coming in, because that's the secret sauce, really, that makes companies grow is money. You need money to make money. Well, that's where capital markets are designed for. Capital markets are simply a way of massive crowdfunding, if you will. It's crowdfunding business enterprise. And that's really the biggest, earliest, best crowdfunding, well organized, was the invention of we the people being able to pick and choose and decide on some companies that we would like to help grow and flourish. And we're letting them borrow our money effectively. That's what stock exchanges at its core are designed for. They're designed for we the people to have an avenue to lend money to business venture. Well, along the way, many of the people that kind of pull the strings, that control those exchanges, New York Stock Exchange, Chicago Board of Options Exchange, um, it got very, very difficult and very, very expensive to get your company listed. Another word for that is going public. The going public got difficult. Unfortunately, as a nation, we've slid backward. I'd love to see that reverse, and I've got some ideas on how I think we can make it easier once again to have companies go out for public funding to become publicly traded. Yes, there are some trade-offs to that, and we can get into those in a different conversation. There are some pluses and minuses. You give up some freedoms, but in order to go public, you have to go through an exchange like New York Stock Exchange. Well, that's been corrupted. I have to think through how I want to present this. My area of expertise and the realm in which I've worked for decades in the world of finance has to do with analyzing the merits of what ultimately gets invested in. And that's evaluating managers, looking at things like mutual funds, and assessing whether or not they're doing a good job. A lot of that got turned on its ear around the time that Vanguard hit the scene. Because Vanguard, basically from early on, started to use algorithms instead of people going out there and doing assessments of good versus bad and making investment decisions for you on your behalf. And what that looks like for you is that 401k sign up sheet. You may select a few different mutual funds, or if you work with a stock advisor or a financial advisor, they may come to you with a list of recommendations. Oftentimes, those are mutual funds. Well, I started to notice some time ago that the conversations, the method of making decisions inside of mutual funds, that means what ultimately they get invested in, shifted dramatically. And it was obvious to me and a handful of other people who pay attention to how mutual funds, different what are called pooled investments, make decisions. So I'm going to pause to interject that I'm looking now at the comments, and we are live on 5 different social media platforms. We're live on Rumble, X, YouTube, Facebook, and Substack. If you have any questions or any part of this is unclear, feel free to ask questions. I will do my best to answer your questions and get good, timely answers to you. If you're in a place where you can't or don't want to comment publicly, feel free to email me. I'll include those in future discussion. The email is Jonathan, Jonathan, at UnWoke.Investing.com. Send those emails and I'll try my darndest to answer questions. But I've got a few things that we're going to talk through, and I've got a few of them already out on the table. One of them is if you have a company like Vanguard that really, for the most part, runs an algorithm and the computer generates decisions about how your money gets invested, then you run the risk of the algorithm becoming corrupted, meaning that the markets or circumstances can override what might normally happen with the algorithm, and you may get too much consolidation. You may get too much of your money in too small an area of investment. Typically, what should happen and what everybody should strive for is having a good, well-rounded, diverse portfolio of all kinds of different investments. That helps to spread the risk of loss across lots of different types of investments and different markets, different sizes of companies, different industries. But what we've seen, really, I think, starting with Vanguard, was a push toward a few companies having massive control over broad, huge areas of the market. A prime example, and I've talked about this in a series of posts, is a company called Amazon. I'm sure you've heard of them. It was unheard of for the longest time for any one company to have as much control and power and industry as Amazon. Pause and think about it for a moment. Amazon is into, and a significant portion of, publishing, pharmaceutical, web traffic, shipping and logistics, and an array of other things, supply chain. So Amazon, and this is not an encouragement to buy or sell anything. If you're following Unwoke, I think by the end of the conversation, you will probably start to avoid Amazon a little bit. But if you get to the point where you've got a small handful of companies like Amazon that have huge global implications and seem to be driving toward more global power and money and resources and crush more of market competition in all those market sectors and more, you've already got, as I said, publishing, which is huge. It's really important. That controls and determines what people are able to read and get access to, and web traffic. If you remember, during the early COVID era in 2020, there was a social media platform called Parler that was shut down. That was a shock to the system. It was Amazon that did that. It was Amazon Web Services, or AWS. So when you think about it, if you pause and have the perspective of, if you're like me and don't believe that we should have monopolies, just one company controlling too much and having too much power, that's a company that already had taken over much of publishing and much of supply and demand and all kinds of other things. In 2020, shutting down a social media platform because they controlled web traffic. They control a huge portion. I don't have the percentages in front of me, but they control a huge portion of web traffic. There are competitors, and I encourage people to consider the competitors out there. One of them actually was a guest on this program. Andrew Ridow runs Liberation Tech. They do many of the same things on the web side, web traffic and website design and hosting, all those kinds of things at a patriotic, domestic competitor to Amazon. So anyway, that's a side note. I would go and check out Liberation Tech. By the way, in his last interview, Andrew Ridow mentioned that anybody that comes to him and Liberation Tech, because they've got all kinds of great stuff to compete with Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, and places like them. If you do go and check it out and like them, mention Unwoke, you get 50% off on the first 3 months. And if you do end up developing a relationship, some of that may come back to help support episodes like this one in the future. No obligation, but I do like to tease that out to get people hopefully taking a look at competitors like Liberation Tech. Anyway, that's a complete tangent. Getting back to what I call the globalist bubble. And that is, by the way, an episode and a long form write up that I did. I'm looking at the date, and that was actually January of this year, 2025. I did a big post. What is the globalist bubble? If you end up with around, I'm going to call it 30-ish companies that have way too much wealth, power, control of money, and global control over supply chain, logistics, distribution, and all those sorts of things, you have a recipe for disaster. I call it global communism because if you have 30-ish companies, and if you can show that the owner group or the control behind those 30-ish companies are really the same small number of people, then you end up with, I know this is going to sound strange to most, but I've tracked this and you can see my steps and you can feel free to look through and agree or disagree with me, but I've shown it to be true. You have companies like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and others that own each other. They have cross ownership and own and control much of what happens at these big globalist companies that have too much money. So what that's done is a few different things simultaneously. It has made business venture, or what should be capital markets, cash starved. It's made for a vast number of companies all over the US and all over the West that should be able to get access to money. And hopefully some of them grow and thrive and flourish and become the next new thing and become some great company of the future. Most of them, I argue, most of them have become cash starved. And they just can't get their hands on capital. In the meantime, you've got those 30-ish companies that are so arguably overvalued that it, a long time ago, became sort of preposterous. I saw it put this way, and I'll give you a few analogies so that you don't think that I'm off my mark here. It was stated recently that one company, NVIDIA, their stock price makes that one stock larger than the German and Italian stock markets, the entirety of their stock markets combined. I haven't researched that myself, but I've looked at the size, and at a cursory glance, I believe that's probably true. In a similar sort of comment, there was an economist that I listened to recently who made the comment that if you believe in the current valuation, that's the stock price of Apple stock, then you believe that Apple as a company will all be living in Apple homes, wearing Apple devices, streaming Apple services, and driving Apple vehicles. It's gotten that high. And as a third kind of component to my thought process behind calling these companies overvalued, recently, the most recent report I've posted on this, I shared a link to a newspaper article that went in depth into stock bonuses that were given at some of these companies. But some of the top leadership of these companies in the most recent reports got stock bonuses north of $16 million. So imagine you're the chairman or CEO or something of some company, and as a bonus for your year of working there, you got, I think it was 16.7 million on average. $16.7 million worth of stock. That's an indication that companies are trying to creatively figure out ways to spend the money because they have too much. They have to get creative and brainstorm about ways to just divvy out the money. When you put those together, you have an environment where it's very difficult for competitors to compete. That's the opposite of free markets. And you have an environment where you have too few companies with control over virtually everything, from pharmaceutical, shipping, logistics, what we buy, what we read, web traffic, you name it. I'm not even going to get into that revolving door between Wall Street and Washington, D.C. And it was just earlier today, I had a caller discussing, it was actually in specific reference to Nancy Pelosi and her stock trading. That's storied, and we continue to sort of grit our teeth at Congress and our representatives in Washington doing this insider stock trading deals, allegedly. To me, it looks pretty clear, but we have to say allegedly because it hasn't been tried in court yet. I'd love to get to that point, that we actually try these things, but that's another side note. So if you're with me so far and you go back and take a look at the globalist bubble, and I think that anybody reasonable will come to the same conclusions I have, that we have created an environment where BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, many of these big money managers managing trillions and trillions of dollars have turned a blind eye to, overwhelmingly, free markets and all kinds of different potential companies that could grow and flourish, and instead used the woke terminology, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and environmental, social, and governance, etc., to use that as an excuse to funnel capital markets, that's money, into a very small number of companies. I've proven that. And one of the examples, and one of the ways that I had to prove that, is something that I call the parade of woke sameness. What I did is looked at the major holdings of, I went through the first 36, I believe, of the top 100 401k mutual funds. If you find it in a 401k plan, I wanted to see what their major holdings were, and they're nearly identical. So that diverse, spread the risk in your portfolio, get into diverse markets, and have different size companies, small and large, and give yourself some growth potential. All of that stuff, fairly universally, is out the window over the last 5 or 6+ years. We've gotten overly consolidated. And if you talk to people who work in finance, or you listen to some of the talking heads on the financial networks, you'll hear them say, and you've been hearing them say for the last few years, that it's, I believe, 7 or 8 companies comprise about 40% of the S&P 500. That's a way of measuring a part of the market. That's unhealthy, and it's not normal, and it's not right. Well, here's the next step in trying to understand what's happening and why. Let's put all of this in the context of the midterm elections coming up next year, 2026. I've said this before, and I'm working on saying it in as clear, understandable, and concise language as I can find. I believe that the detrimental, monumental, destructive impact to the Trump administration and to the MAGA movement is, at this point, very, very likely, imminently likely, to burst that bubble mid-2026. So here's what that would look like if I'm right. If I'm right, those artificially propped up, inflated, exaggerated markets, those few companies that have so much money, I can't figure out what to do with it. The political impact of tanking those, popping the bubble mid-2026, would be it would be political gold for the, whatever you want to call them. I always struggle for the right terminology in these sorts of conversations. Global communist, whatever, anti-American, the people who don't believe in MAGA, the globalists. I have some friends that just call them globalists. I'll stick with that term for this today's live stream. The globalists would count that as a monumental win, because what will happen is they can hang that then on the Trump administration and the Republicans and sweep a blue wave of the far left into office. Because think about it. What will happen mid 2026 if all the people that are just sort of feeling okay and complacent right now, all the MAGA people, all the people all over social media with the America First posts, and they've still got the image of Trump with the bloody ear with his fist in the air saying, fight, fight, fight. All those people are sort of comfortable right now because they're opening up their 401k statement and they're thinking that the markets, I'm air quoting, that the markets are at an all-time high or near the high, and their 401k is doing great, their IRA account, they're feeling like they've got lots of money. And what could go wrong? What could very easily go wrong is all those people that have been duped into thinking that they have a properly diversified portfolio, and the people who are just riding the algorithm, or managers who drank the Kool-Aid and went woke and are ultimately invested over and over and over again in the same pool, nearly identical fashion of those 30-ish companies. It doesn't take much. It would actually be very easy to just tank those. If that happens, the political fallout is like nothing we've ever seen before. I will call that the biggest rug pull in human history if they pull it off. I've been saying for a while now, looking at the negative headwinds against many of the pharmaceutical companies. We have the MAHA movement. We have states that are removing some of the childhood immunology shot mandates and all those kinds of things. That takes away from that recurring forced revenue sort of stream of pharmaceutical companies. But so far, pharmaceutical company stocks haven't really been impacted, not negatively, not to any great extent. So if I'm right, and those are propped up, and I count those as part of that sort of globalist cabal, probably among the worst of the worst, and if unknowingly you're in your IRA, your 401k, or you're paying your stock advisor, your financial advisor, financial planner to put you in some array of mutual funds and exchange traded funds, and if ultimately they're invested over and over and over again in the same 30-ish companies, then imagine what happens mid 2026 when you open up your statement and say, oh my gosh, these policies aren't working. And maybe CNN is right, and the trade deals that Trump has worked, maybe they're bad, and my stock portfolio is down. You'll feel the pain. That's what motivates people to vote. And that's what motivates people is people, let's face it, voters can be fickle. If voters can be made to feel pain in 2026, I believe that they will give up hope on MAGA. They will give up hope on the Trump administration. They will turn against what's happening with the tariffs. Any of those people that are on the bubble, or maybe currently like the tariffs because so much money is coming in because of them, they will turn against them. They will turn against Trump and this administration. So that's my prediction. I believe it is very, very, very likely that the globalist bubble will be made to pop mid 2026 for political gain. The question now will be getting this conversation in front of more people like me who are paying attention and are willing to look beyond just the ooh BlackRock or ooh Vanguard or ooh State Street. They must be great because they're managing whatever. I think combined they have $30 trillion they're managing. I started asking questions actually back in 2007 when I was questioning the methods that were being used to funnel money into BlackRock. That got me in big trouble back then. I got the obligatory threats from lawyers and everything. But hoorah, I was off to the races. More people need to be questioning these things. And if you know people who are interested in this subject and willing to look at how our capital markets are actually being manipulated and how and why we got to the point where there's so few companies that are so overfunded. And then let's look at the political implications of that globalist bubble. Again, the date of that, the long form post that I did was January 6th. I'm looking at it now. It's UnWoke.Academy. Go back and check that out and look for the other one, Parade of Woke Sameness, and give your feedback. There's a section there you can provide some comment. As I said at the beginning of this live stream, if you don't want to comment publicly, feel free to email me at Jonathan, Jonathan, at unwokeinvesting.com. If you'd like to remain anonymous, simply let me know in the email. I will share your comments or work simply to get an answer without using your name. If you're MAGA, America First, if you like this Trump administration, and even if you're not sure, but you dread the alternative, which would be another Biden somebody, or the prospect of another salacious impeachment, which I keep hearing would be impending in after 2026 if the far left gain control again of the House and Senate. If you don't want that, let's drive this conversation. Talk to people around you. Point them toward UnWoke.Academy. Point them toward this episode, and let's all chip in together to advance this conversation. Let's talk about it. Send people my way that you know that work in finance as well. I'd love to have other people out there that do the same things I do in a similar way to challenge me on this. I consider it peer review, and I'd love to have more of that. This has been another episode of Livestream UnWoke.Academy. Every Wednesday we go live. I hope to see you back here next week. In the meantime, have a great week. Take care.